welcome to Booked Solid, New Canaan Library's podcast for young adults, new adults, and the forever young adult at heart. I'm Kathleen.
And I'm Sam Connell. We're both librarians here at New Canaan Library. This week, we are reading a wonderful book that's been on the New York Times bestsellers for adults. It's a great crossover book for teens as well. This has been a really popular book, and it's a book set in France in 1714. A young woman is desperate to get out of a marriage. She makes a bargain to live forever, but it's a little bit more of a curse because no one can remember her. She's forgotten by everyone she meets. She can't write her story. She can't write or speak her name. So this begins this extraordinary life of Addie LaRue. And it's quite an adventure. It plays out over almost 300 years across centuries and continents through different moments in history. And she learns how to survive in a life where she cannot actually die.
So before we get any further, I'd like to warn everyone that we will be spoiling everything. So if you have not finished the book, turn off the podcast right now and come back to it.
So the book sort of plays with time. One of the things that is dizzying and exciting is that you're in different centuries and it's all one montage as you move through the plot of the book. So you're sort of discovering what's happening in the past. You're in present day New York City. I sort of like that. So I don't know that I want to jump to the spoiler, like the real big plot twists towards the end. I'm really curious, Kathleen, did you like, I'm calling it magical realism, but magical realism isn't really your thing. So what did you think?
I think when it comes to fantasy, I am not a fantasy reader, which I've probably told you, the podcast, and the entire world many times. But I do agree, whether it's magical realism or some sort of semi-fantastical world, it's the kind of thing that I can still enjoy. And so I did enjoy this book a lot, and I think this was maybe not something that I would typically pick up, but something that had a lot discussion-wise, a lot to think about, and I think a lot of those things, which are similar to maybe the previous books that we did on the podcast this season, with those issues of like identity and what would you sacrifice to kind of live the life you want to live, and what is the right life, and all of these things. I think all of that's really fascinating. So that's one of the things that I liked the most about this book. What did you think?
I struggled a little bit coming up with read-alikes for this episode because it feels a little bit fantasy. It feels a little bit magical realism. And yet, rather than like a goal of true love or winning a kingdom, it actually explores some fascinating themes about survival, identity, immortality, love. I think the thing this book does very, very well is create an adventuresome read that really challenges you to think about what makes this human life worthwhile.
I definitely agree with you there. One of the things that kind of gets lost in pitching this book to someone as something they should read, because I think we do get kind of caught up in these details, but it really is, I think you're getting to the heart of it, of why it's so affecting and why people like it so much, it's a very human story. It really is about how do people make choices and live a life that they find fulfilling.
Let's talk first about how she starts out. So Addie's living in this really small town in France, and the book touches a lot on themes of feminism. She's really looking to escape this idea of marriage. She can't think of anything. In fact, the book opens with her running for her life, and you the reader, and you're questioning, is it violence or is someone chasing her? And you realize she's running from her own wedding, and her parents try to encourage her. Even her best friend, who's married with children, but Addie's really looking to escape this idea of an identity as just a wife and a mother.
So I really like that idea of this very feminist tale. Addie is someone who kind of wants a different sort of life, and she gets maybe a little more than she bargained for with that. But she's really pushing up against this idea of womanhood as to blossom and wither is the quote from the novel, which I thought was nicely put. All of these phrases are really beautiful in this book, by the way. I mean, the writing is very lush and magical, but also just kind of like very beautifully put. I thought she was a really interesting character to kind of see what she's willing to sacrifice to kind of live this life as she wants to rather than as it's been laid out for her. And as we talked about, very similar to every other book that we've read so far for season 3 of the podcast, but particularly was reminding me a bit of Genuine Fraud, except that Addie is not a monster.
But it's interesting you say that because I don't really find Addie particularly likable. I appreciate the feminist slant, especially in the beginning. I appreciate that the book sort of moves through all the ways she can have an impact, and she wants to live a bigger life. She wants to have more out of this life. And I love all of that part. But at the same time, there's something almost, I don't know, sociopathic about the way she just walks away from her mom and her father. And she's willing to give up all of her relationships and everything she loves for a chance at an adventure. And that turns out to be a really bad deal. So I agree with you that the writing is beautiful. And I would consider this magical realism because it's very much grounded in a lot of points of world history. But then they add this element, so she goes into the forest and she begs and begs for anything. She just wants the world to be more. And then she has this moment where she's asking for any entity to answer her. And there's this grandmotherly figure that warns her against praying to the gods that answer at dark, and it just so happens to be dusk as she's running from her wedding, and something does come out of the forest and grants her a wish. But a lot like I'd say in fantasy, where fairies are very literal, these deals are very literal, and so she ends up offering her soul. She gets to keep living for as long as she wants to keep living. And so this dark entity, this Lucifer type character, takes a bet that she's going to tire of living.
I think he doesn't believe she'll make it a year. And through sheer force of will, because lots of terrible things happen to her because she does not realize, maybe she should have been a little more careful with her language. She's agreed without realizing it to be forgotten by everyone she ever meets and to basically have no mark on the world.
And that's where I think two things are really fascinating. Number one is how she starts to survive. And again, not particularly likable. She has to steal. She lives life on the margins. She becomes this ghost-like character. So every morning, whenever, regardless of who she's with romantically, they wake up in the morning and they completely forget her. And it almost opens with that scene. We jump back and forth across 300 years. And that's one of the things that really haunts her, that she can't have just a lovely morning with breakfast with somebody she cares about or somebody she's interested in. But then the story really explores this idea of survival, and she goes through some very harsh times. She's in Paris when people aren't really kind. There are no government agencies, and she's really she can feel hunger, she can feel pain, she can feel all of these things. And then she starts to learn how to survive, and this Luke character, this sort of this dark devil-like character that makes this deal with her, keeps checking in on her, and she never gives up. She's actually, I think that's one of the likable things about her. And then the book shifts into a really neat exploration of how, of all the different ways that a human can achieve immortality. Is it actually magically living for forever? The way presumably, she would if she never tires of her life? Is it being able to tell your story? Is it having an impact on someone? In the beginning, her best friend has children, and that's sort of her way of having an impact on the world, is that she's having children that go forth and do other things and have their own children. But Addie really turns to art.
I think well, first of all, the structure of the book is very striking in that we see these art pieces that have been inspired by Addie, and that's kind of like the dividing mark into these different sections. And I do think just the use of art in this and Addie's influence on it in sort of an indirect way is a really fascinating thing to dig into. And so particularly I wanted to talk about this role of the muse and Addie as this kind of silent female artist, because she is not able to directly influence anything. So she is kind of suggesting, in a way, to these artists that she befriends, becomes romantically involved with, and then they are in turn kind of creating without realizing her hand in it.
I thought that was a really neat device. So Addie has these 7 freckles that look like 7 stars, and they turn up in the art, and there's different, you see these events in her life and how that turns into either a piece of art or a sheet of music or a song or a sculpture or a sketch. I love that the author offers this idea that ideas are wild. While Addie can't write her story or have an impact, she can make these suggestions and become this muse, and that ideas are more powerful than anything that can be contained in whatever magical arts are at play here for this deal that she cut with Luke. So there's one point where she is involved romantically with somebody who doesn't realize that he's meeting her every night, and she's actually known him for a long time. And eventually it comes towards the end where she runs across the song that she keeps suggesting to him, and he has this whole song written, or there's a whole sheet of music, or there's a painting or a sketch. And I really enjoy that part of the book. I thought this was beautiful to think about how ideas are wild and how art is this salvation for Addie.
I feel like it is very bittersweet. I think one of the nice things is we kind of see the trajectory of the book into maybe her finally getting to the most explicit way of kind of telling her story. But it is certainly bittersweet to me to read these sections where she is, playing the piano or helping to write something or helping inspire art, and then she's lost to history. She's lost the second someone leaves through the door. I think it is very reminiscent of actual history. So I think it's kind of this interesting take on maybe a muse is not someone who necessarily cannot create or does not create, but someone whose creation is taken for granted, and then someone else is able to be kind of celebrated as the genius. But at the same time, in this case, Addie is a creator herself.
And she gets a lot of satisfaction from that process. That's her one real driving passion from a salon in Paris. She comes across a lot of musicians and artists, and that's something that almost feeds her more than what life would have offered her if she stayed mortal. But it was a tough trade. I think this book really explores the loneliness of her experience, and it explores all the different ways that we have relationships and what matters, and also this idea of telling your story and having a life that's meaningful, having a mark on this world. So this is the stage she's in, and she does get very tired of her life, but she almost doesn't enjoy this life but refuses to give in out of stubbornness to Luke. And that's when she stumbles on this person, Henry, who remembers her, and that's a huge plot twist, and she's shocked by it.
And that was really the thing that hooked me in the description of the book. I think that there is this story that is interesting, but it needs something to kind of shake it up. And then this is like a really interesting question, because she's lived so long without some kind of connection like this. It brings up a lot of issues and questions about what does it mean to have someone remember you after so long of not being remembered. And I think you've made fun of me a little bit, but I was saying that on the surface, I thought that being forgotten, there were a lot of benefits to it. and how that could be, I mean, ultimately we see, right, that she can't form lasting relationships, and there's not this really continuity from one moment to the next. And even kind of positive interactions are fleeting and finite. So she has to just imagine relationships usually, who she would have been friends with or who she would have been romantically involved with, but they don't really come to fruition the way they would. But I was saying that I do think that there's something freeing about maybe not regretting, oh, did I say the wrong thing? You could just leave and come back and say something genius.
That's so funny you see it. That like you could try as many times as you'd like to make a good first impression, or record a podcast, actually. Exactly. But I feel like I'm quite the opposite. I'm such an extrovert, and what matters so much to me are my relationships and connections. She becomes very adrift, and she actually, I mean, she doesn't become like the world's greatest pickpocket. She does get very street smart. She learns how to survive, but I think the thing that's so impressive is she really masters the art of meeting somebody and spending the next 12 hours with them. Because that's all she has. So,
right.
So some of these like long-term relationships are like ones that go the full day, and someone who's very impromptu and say, hey, let's just go on a picnic, let's go to a museum. And then she's really sort of mastered that. By the time Addie meets Henry, she spent 300 years without having a meaningful relationship with the exception of Luke. This is this great mystery why Henry can remember her. And Addie has her first morning where she has a cup of coffee and breakfast with someone who remembers her. And it's actually one of the more wonderful things that's happened to her in 300 years. And they develop a relationship, and then it gets a little bit weird. She has to be very crafty because as Henry introduces her to his friends, they don't remember her, and it starts to get very awkward.
I like that for a while, Henry just thinks that he has terrible friends who really hate Addie. But then eventually she does confess to him her story. The funny thing about that is that he believes her.
I love that. Addie was like, okay, I have to confess I'm 300 years old, and we're expecting this disbelief. But instead, the bigger plot twist is that he actually cut a deal with Luke, too. Being this sort of tortured soul, he has this life where his parents are disappointed in him, his fiancée broke his heart and broke off the engagement, his career is going nowhere, he's experiencing disappointments there, and he's just so tired of feeling consumed by his flaws. So he cuts a deal where he asks just to be enough. There's something very tragic there.
And just for 1 year, which I think is a terrible deal, and he really should have negotiated better with Luke, because by the time he meets Addie, he's well into that year.
And Addie becomes really upset because she demands to know, and it turns out they only have 1 month. So she then becomes frantic to try to renegotiate terms, either for Henry or her own terms. And it's in this process, in the flashbacks, that you're stunned to see that she actually had a romantic relationship with Luke. It lasted quite a while. I think it was a year or two, maybe, or maybe even more than that.
I think it was decades.
Was it? Maybe. We'll go back and check.
We might need to go back and check. But I think it makes sense in a way, not because Luke is great, but because she really is starved for anyone to know her. And so he is truly the only person who would be able to remember her and give her some sense of herself and some sense of continuity and some sense of home in a way. So until Henry, Luke is that person to her. But I think it's very interesting because I didn't pick up on this, but you mentioned that the role that Henry plays is not a coincidence, which is something that I didn't realize.
Yeah, I definitely, that's the one plot twist I was able to guess. I think for the most part, V.E. Schwab does a great job switching things up and keeping you guessing. But this is the one I saw because I love that one scene where Luke is the man that doesn't get wet in the rain and Henry's ready to give up on life. And that's when the deal is cut. And when Luke looks at Henry, he says, I believe you're perfect. And in that moment, I did suspect that it was not so much about making Henry feel better in his quest to be enough, but it was about the fact that Henry's features look a lot like Luke's. They keep referring to that. I think they say something like same black hair, same sharp jawline. I did get the sense that Luke chose Henry to finally break Addie because she can't have her heart broken if she can't have a relationship. I love that you mentioned how in some ways Addie loses her humanity, because what intensifies this love, this romance between Luke and Addie is that they're both lonely. Luke has no other human he's had an extended dialogue with, and Addie moves away from becoming human when she lives through centuries where people are making connections and relationships and making a tangible mark on this world.
So what did we think about the ending?
Oh, I don't know. You know what I'm going to say. I, you know that I don't like series.
Okay.
And I definitely felt that this ending set me up to read a sequel.
Okay, that's interesting. Because I was thinking, well, I don't. I guess I do wonder, what happens to these characters next. It seems pretty clear that Addie probably never interacts with Henry again, but she is able to see, spoiler, that the Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, he's published a book of her life, her story, because she's been able to tell it to him. He's the only person who can remember it. He can write down what she cannot. And so that story's out in the world. Everything feels kind of wrapped up, I guess, except for Addie's plan basically to make Luke sick of her.
Right. This will go on so long as he wants her by his side. I don't know what person would ever make that deal, because that's really... I could get somebody to break that deal within 12 hours. I could be very grating on the nerves.
I do wonder why it's going to take so much effort for her, because I do think, how hard could it be? But
But, okay, so here's what makes me a little bit sad. Like, okay, so Addie is no longer human in my mind, right? Or yours either, probably, since you were the first one to really notice that. So this is where I feel that Henry's story ends, and this is in some ways really Henry's Book of Henry, where this is a person who's given up on life and has gotten the second chance. It's a lot more like other books we've read, right? Where a person has a second chance and they wake up and they decide this is actually the best possible life, the life I'm living right now, like the Midnight Library. Whereas now, Addie and Luke are in this strange place where they leave the humans behind. They vibing as married. And what is Addie going to do to make Luke sick of her? What are they going to do for fun now? Is she going to help him capture souls? Like, what is it there? They seem to like fine dining and art together. That's very much up in the air for me. So I think there's more of Addie and Luke's story. It's been 300 years. There's nothing keeping us from exploring, more time with them. Although this book does catch up to modern times. So unless Luke and Addie are going to be jumping on spaceships together.
Exactly. Yeah, so the sequel takes place on a space station. I think you're right, though, and I think I'm actually picturing kind of like a darker story as you're telling me this, because I'm just thinking that it's just about them playing games with humans at this point. And I don't know. I mean, I didn't really think of Henry as being kind of the star of the book, but he is, I guess he is the human center of it. He is the character. I can maybe relate to aspects of Addie, but overall, I mean, not exactly, because she has had to leave humanity behind as she's adapted to her very unique circumstances.
I'm with you. I mean, I didn't really connect to Addie. Honestly, if I were in her shoes, she was born in 1691. I'd be dead with 3 babies by 1705 or something like that. Like that's just how I would have done it. I think her loneliness was really quite terrible, and she suffered a lot. I mean, there were times where Luke saved her during the dregs of war and famine and starvation and plagues. And I do feel that the flirtation between Luke and Addie played out very nicely. But Luke gets a little petulant, and he becomes more human, I think, towards the end, while Addie becomes less so. She's less concerned of the trappings of humans, and she does love Henry, and she does make the sacrifice. And she even, I think it's a nice full circle moment, because she has said to Luke at one point, if you really loved me, you would have let me go by now. And she actually does that for Henry.
I didn't even pick up on that, but I do think that is a nice, I think that's maybe her at her most human, that she's still willing, she still has faith in his future and love for him and wants what's best for him, which is this deal that's not great for her.
I really loved the book. I thought the writing was beautiful. I love magical realism. I love the fantastic mixed in with everyday life. I like the different elements of history and art. It was beautifully woven together. I thought the characters were really interesting. Luke was fascinating to me. But towards the end, she's just like an upset, jilted lover. I thought it was very well done, and even though there were a couple of things that I thought I guessed at, for the most part, for all of the big plot twists towards the end, I was very surprised and caught off guard. And I actually love that V. Schwab, as you're reading this, you're like, how is this going to play out? And she actually does it beautifully.
The story sustains itself so much better and so much longer than I would think, because it kind of just sounds like an interesting concept, but the places it goes, I think, are really fascinating. And talking about it, I realize there's so much that's so thought-provoking. I can understand why it's a great book club book.
Yes, I agree. So do you have a quote for us?
I do, and this plays into a lot of what you've been talking about with Addie tiring of this life and how much of a toll it takes, and maybe give some insight into why she continues in spite of everything. She may not feel the years weakening her bones, her body going brittle with age, but the weariness is a physical thing like rot inside her soul. There are days when she mourns the prospect of another year, another decade, another century. There are nights when she cannot sleep, moments when she lies awake and dreams of dying. But then she wakes and sees the pink and orange dawn against the clouds, or hears the lament of a lone fiddle, the music and the melody, and remembers there is such beauty in the world, and she does not want to miss it. Any of it.
Yeah, that quote really captures Addie. How many of us could still find magic and beauty in this world? I know we joke about that you're more extroverted, you wouldn't mind being forgotten, and I'm extroverted and I need the connections, but I'm also maybe more cynical. That quote makes me think of myself in that situation. I'm nervous that after 300 years that humans would disappoint me so much that I want out. To be able to just see the everyday beauty and not a lot of what our species can do to each other and to other things. It's neat that she is still in wonder of this world and all of the newness and all of the ideas and the art while being mired in everyday frailties of people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I could understand living out of spite, which she does a bit, and
true.
The stubbornness. But I do think that she is, and it is like we talked about with the art, I think there are just these things that she knows that there's always going to be something new, something different, and she can still find that wonder for it, which is really lovely and really nice. And also I think the writing of that too, just it kind of captures this feel of the book where it's just very lush and just very magical.
Yes, I agree with the writing, which will bring me to some read-alike. So if you enjoyed this book, I have a few ideas for you. The first is The Book of Pearl by Timothy de Fombelle. It's translated from the French, and I try to always encourage people to read books in translation with regularity. This book is about Joshua Pearl, who wants to be reunited with his love in the world of fairy tales, but he's trapped in Paris on the eve of World War II. So another wonderfully, beautifully written and beautifully translated book that blurs the line between Paris and World War II and history with some really fascinating, just this whole plot that courses through this book in terms of this fairy tale world. So that's The Book of Pearl. I strongly recommend it. The next book I have for you, which I'd like to suggest, is The Weight of Feathers by Anna Marie McLemore. And pretty much, I think I've mentioned this before. Anything by McLemore is wonderful, magical realism. This book in particular is about two different traveling, performing families. One performs in the trees and has feathers, and the other has beautiful costumes in the water. And it's very much a Romeo and Juliet retelling, but that oversimplifies it because the writing soars. My next recommendation is a little bit off-grid and a little bit different. This is an adult book called Song of Achilles. It's very popular, and I know that a lot of people have heard of it. It's been on the bestseller list. It's written by Madeline Miller. It's basically the retelling of the Trojan War, and in the center is the romance between Achilles and Patroclus. the reason why I suggest this as a read-alike is that it's very different. This is a historical fiction in ancient Greek history, but their themes are really similar. So if you sort of enjoy this idea of how do we as humans chase this idea of immortality, it's a really great book. It's beautifully written. I do recommend it. I really quite enjoyed that as well. So, those are my recommended read-alikes. Kathleen, what are we reading next?
So next month we are reading Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe. And this is kind of an unusual pick for us. It's our first graphic novel, I believe. And I shouldn't say graphic novel because it's actually a memoir.
That's true.
So it is our first graphic memoir. This is the kind of journey of self-identity, self-discovery. It was created as a way for the author to explain what it means to be non-binary and asexual. So it's a personal story that was kind of created with very personal aims, but then became this larger piece that works both as kind of this trajectory of kind of figuring out, which pronouns to use, and also just how Maya self-identifies. It's also kind of a guide on gender identity and maybe sort of an introduction for people who are unfamiliar or want this personal story as a means into thinking about stuff that they might be unfamiliar with. So I thought it was really interesting and eye-opening because it was just so helpful to look at Maya's life and then kind of see what it means to be genderqueer. And it kind of defines terminology in a way, but also just kind of shows how everything is so personal and subjective.
I'm really looking forward to it. It's actually, this book has caused quite a bit of ripples throughout people reading it and also with challenges coming through. I've already read it, so I'm very much looking forward to discussing it with you, Kathleen, and hopefully we've had a lot of tech issues this time, so hopefully by the tail end that this will be, we apologize for any audio or any sound quality issues. This is the third time we've tried to record this.
This is the as Addie is not able to write down her story, it turns out we are not able to successfully record us talking about her story, which I don't know if we've been brought into her curse somehow. Yeah. So I'm hoping that by the end of this, it sounds like a complete podcast without weird jumps or odd sound issues.
But I think this is it. I think we're getting to the end. We did it.
All right.
Thank you for listening.